They say every hospital has its ghosts, but what I experienced wasn't just a ghost story. It was real, and it happened on the quiet floor. They called it the quiet floor, not for recovery, not for patients needing peaceful rest. It was for those who shouldn't recover, or perhaps those who weren't allowed to. When I first transferred here, fresh out of orientation and bright-eyed, I thought it was just a specialized palliative care unit, a place where people came to fade away. They told me it was for complex cases that required minimal stimulation. That word, minimal, it always struck me as odd. Usually, hospitals are buzzing. Alarms, hurried footsteps, the constant beeping of machines, but not here. Here, after 9 p.m., the silence was so profound it felt like a physical presence, pressing in on you. It was heavier than any night shift dread I'd ever known. My first week, I fumbled, dropped a chart with a clatter. The head nurse, Ms. Albright, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, appeared instantly. She didn't yell. She just looked at me, a silent reprimand that chilled me more than any shout. Rule number 1, dear, she'd whispered, her voice barely a breath against the overwhelming hush. Never, ever make noise after 9 p.m. Not a dropped pen, not a squeaky shoe. The patients, they need their rest. Her words felt like a euphemism, like she was talking about something far older and more predatory than human patients. Maria was the one who enlightened me. She was a nurse with haunted eyes and a permanent tremor in her hands. She'd been on the quiet floor for years, a relic everyone else seemed to avoid. She saw me struggling with the eerie atmosphere. The constant vigilance against sound. One night, during a hushed coffee break, she pulled me aside, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. She didn't whisper. She mouthed the words, her breath hot against my ear. "It's not for the patient's rest," she'd mouthed. "It's for our safety. They feed on sound." I scoffed, but the tremor in her hands, the genuine terror in her eyes, it wasn't an act. She also gave me rule number 2, scrawled on a crumpled piece of paper she pressed into my palm. Never look directly at patient 7's shadow. She called him the shadow patient, a nickname whispered only when the floor was completely empty. Or so we thought. Maria vanished 2 weeks later, just gone. No notice, no forwarding address. Her locker was emptied. HR said she'd resigned without notice, a rare occurrence. But the hospital was a labyrinth of rumors. Some whispered she simply walked out mid-shift, leaving everything behind. Others said she'd been transferred to a different facility, but no one knew which one. I found her note tucked into my break room cubby, hidden beneath an old coffee mug. It was written in a shaky hand. The ink smudged as if she'd been crying. They feed on sound, and when the sound isn't enough, they feed on fear. I broke a rule. Don't make my mistake. I knew, deep down. She wasn't talking about Ms. Albright or hospital protocol. She was talking about something else entirely. Something that lived in the overwhelming silence of the quiet floor. Something that had taken Maria. And last night, I broke both rules. Patient 7 arrived on a Tuesday. Sometime after midnight. There were no sirens. No ambulance lights flashing against the pre-dawn darkness. Just a battered, unmarked gurney wheeled silently through the double doors by 2 orderlies I'd never seen before, their faces obscured by the dim lighting. No records, no intake forms, nothing. Ms. Albright simply pointed to room 7, a room that had been conspicuously empty for months, and said, "He's yours tonight." There was no he. Though, not really. Just the sheet-draped form on the gurney, and that shadow. It was the first thing I noticed. Even in the poorly lit hallway, the shadow it cast didn't match the ambient light. It was deeper, richer, a true void that seemed to absorb the faint glow from the nurse's station. It stretched, not just proportionally, but unnaturally, clinging to the walls, elongating as if pulled by an unseen force. Maria's crumpled note screamed in my mind. Never look directly at patient 7's shadow. But how could you not? It was a gravitational pull, an emptiness that demanded attention. It felt hungry. Maria had warned me. If it detaches, run. Don't look back, just run. I always assumed she meant if a patient became violent. Their shadow separating from their body in some metaphor for a lost soul. But looking at this shadow, draped over the gurney like a living shroud, I understood. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a tangible thing, waiting. Last night, my shift started like any other on the quiet floor, suffocatingly silent, punctuated only by my own breathing and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. I was at the nurse's station, meticulously checking charts, trying to convince myself Maria's warnings were just the ramblings of a stressed-out colleague. The clock on the wall crept towards 2:13 a.m. That's when I heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist on the quiet floor. A child's voice, soft, lilting, singing a nursery rhyme. From room 7, my blood ran cold. Patient 7 was an adult. Admitted with nothing. Technically, no children were allowed on this floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the oppressive silence. Every instinct screamed at me to follow Maria's rules, to stay away, to not look, but the sound, innocent yet utterly wrong, pulled me in. I crept to the door of room 7, my hand trembling as it hovered over the doorknob. I peeked inside. The room was bathed in the emergency night light, a pale, sickly glow, and there, beside the bed, was the shadow. It was immense, a towering, distorted figure, crouched low, and the sound, it was coming from it. The shadow was making the singing. And it wasn't just singing. It was performing an impossible, grotesque act. It was peeling the patient's skin like wallpaper, long, thin strips, unfurling from the form on the bed. And the patient, the figure on the bed, was smiling, a wide, beatific, utterly serene smile, as if experiencing the purest joy. Its eyes, vacant and unblinking, stared up at the ceiling, reflecting the dim light like shattered glass. And as I watched, frozen in the doorway, a strip of that peeled skin, translucent and wet, slapped against the floor with a sound so soft, so subtle, I almost missed it. A sound that shouldn't have been there. A sound that broke the profound silence of the quiet floor. After what I saw in room 7, the world felt different. The hospital walls seemed to breathe, and the silence, once merely oppressive, now hummed with unseen eyes. I stumbled back to the nurse's station, heart still trying to claw its way out of my chest. Maria's words, her desperate note, echoed in my head. This wasn't just a strange ward. It was a cage, and I was trapped inside with them. I needed more of Maria's rules. They were the only roadmap in this waking nightmare. I found them later that week, not in another whispered warning, but scrawled on the very whiteboard at the nurse's station, usually reserved for shift handovers and patient updates. They weren't in Ms. Albright's neat handwriting, or even in my own. These were crude, almost violent lines of red marker, as if written in a desperate hurry, and they weren't hospital protocols. They were Maria's rules, transcribed from her fears. Rule number 3. If a chart glows blue, burn it immediately. I thought it was a metaphor, a warning about tampering with records. But then, 2 nights ago, I pulled patient 4's chart. It had a faint, pulsing blue luminescence coming from deep within the paper, a cold, unearthly glow. My hands shook as I carried it to the incinerator in the utility room, my heart hammering against my ribs with every step. The paper didn't just burn, it sizzled, the blue light intensifying before collapsing into a sickly black ash that smelled like burnt ozone and something rotten. I spent the rest of that night scrubbing my hands, feeling the lingering cold of that light on my skin. Rule number 4. All 5 bags must be clear. Always. This seemed simple enough. All IV solutions are clear. Saline or dextrose. But last Tuesday. Saline or dextrose. But last Tuesday, during my rounds, I saw it. Patient 19, his IV bag, normally sparkling and transparent, was full of a viscous, opaque black sludge. It looked like crude oil, or worse. My stomach turned. I instinctively clamped a line, ripped the bag from its hook, and rushed to the nearest sink to dump it. It sloshed out, thick and heavy, leaving dark streaks, but as I watched in horror, a thin, glistening strand of that black substance began to crawl back up the plastic tubing, defying gravity, inching its way back towards the patient's arm. I dropped the bag, gagging, then tore the entire IV setup from the stand and threw it into the biohazard bin, not caring about protocol, only about getting it away from me. I later told Ms. Albright the bag had ruptured. She just nodded, her eyes expressionless. A common occurrence on the quiet floor, she'd said. Common. And then, rule number 5, never let a patient describe your childhood home. This one still makes me sick to my stomach. Patient 12, he was a quiet, elderly man, in for observation. Never spoke, just stared blankly at the ceiling. I was giving him his meds, trying to keep my movements silent, when he suddenly gripped my wrist. His eyes, though unfocused, seemed to pierce right through me, and he began to whisper. He described my childhood home, not just the address, which he couldn't possibly know, but details, intimate, impossible details, the faded floral wallpaper in my mother's bedroom, the chip in the ceramic sink in our downstairs bathroom, and then he whispered about the hidden crawl space in my closet, the one behind the loose panel, under the floorboards, the one where, when I was 10, I found my sister's bones. Bones nobody knew about. Bones that were never found. He didn't just describe it. He described the smell of the dust, the way the light from the crack under the door looked like a thin blade. He whispered it all, his voice dry and raspy, a horrific lullaby just for me. His grip on my wrist tightened, and a cold dread, deeper than anything I'd felt on this floor, settled into my bones. He knew. They knew. And I realized these rules weren't just about survival on the quiet floor. They were about keeping them from getting inside you. The rules weren't just warnings. They were anchors. Thin threads tethering me to some semblance of sanity in a place designed to unravel it. After patient 12, I started carrying Maria's crumpled note with me, tucked into my uniform pocket, feeling its crinkled edges for reassurance. I lived by those rules. Every breath a careful calculation to avoid breaking another one. But Maria had one final rule, one she'd scrawled almost illegibly on the back of the note, as if in a terrible hurry, or perhaps, in the throes of a full-blown panic attack. It was the most nonsensical, the most surreal, and therefore, the one I dreaded most. Her final rule. If the hall elongates, close your eyes and count to 7. 1. I remember reading it, scoffing under my breath, even after everything else. Elongates, like something out of a funhouse mirror. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that died in my throat, swallowed by the ever-present silence of the quiet floor. I dismissed it as Maria's descent into paranoia, until last shift. It was around 3 a.m., that desolate hour when the world feels thinnest, when the veil between what is and what shouldn't be feels almost transparent. I was walking from the nurse's station towards the supply closet, a routine trip I'd made 100 times. The fluorescent lights hummed with their usual dull drone, but as I walked, the hallway didn't feel right. It wasn't just long, it stretched, like taffy being pulled, or a warped video on a dying screen. The doors on either side, which should have been evenly spaced, began to warp, to blur, their numbers melting, their outlines dissolving. They vanished, one by one. The patient rooms, the storage closets, the linen press, all of them folded into the impossible, endless stretch of the corridor. My heart seized. This wasn't a trick of the light, or my tired eyes. This was Maria's rule. This was real. Panic clawed at my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, so tight I saw stars behind my eyelids, and began to count. 1, 2, 3. My voice was a desperate whisper against the terrifying silence. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. 4, 5. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was moving through treacle. 6, 7. I opened my eyes. The hallway was still elongated. But now, only one door remained, room 7. The shadow patient's room. It loomed at the impossibly distant end of the corridor, growing larger with every beat of my terrified heart, as if the hallway itself was funneling me directly towards it. And from behind that door, I heard it. A soft, wet scratching. Tap, tap. Not human scratch, more like claws on wood, or something dragging decaying fingernails down a blackboard. It was faint, but utterly clear in the profound silence. Every fiber of my being screamed. Maria said run. I ran, or I tried to. My legs felt heavy, like I was running through water. The floor beneath me slick with an unseen film. The exit door, which should have been just down the hall, seemed to recede, becoming 3 times farther away, then 10 times. It was a cruel optical illusion, a nightmare made real. Each frantic step brought me no closer, and then I saw it. Patient 7's shadow. It wasn't contained by the door anymore. It slid, a living darkness, under the gap at the bottom of the doorframe, pooling onto the floor of the hallway. It stretched, faster than anything material should, a black tide rushing towards me. It flowed, reformed, elongated, growing taller and taller until it was a towering, impossibly thin column of pure black, and as it coalesced, taking on a more defined form, I saw it, amidst the inky blackness. A single, horrifying detail emerged. It had Mariah's face, her eyes, wide with the terror I now felt, her mouth twisted in a silent, desperate scream. It was her, trapped within the consuming darkness, and it was coming for me. Mariah's face, contorted in silent agony within the consuming shadow, propelled me forward with a frantic, desperate energy I didn't know I possessed. I don't know how I escaped that stretching, warping hallway. I just ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until the impossible distance finally collapsed, and I burst back into the familiar, if still unsettling, nurse's station. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My uniform was damp with cold sweat, and my hands trembled so violently I could barely hold the pen I reached for to sign off my shift. I had to get out of the quiet floor, get out of this hospital. As I reached for the sign-out sheet, my gaze snagged on something on the counter, something that hadn't been there moments before. It was a patient chart, not one I recognized, not one from this floor. It was pristine, almost glowing under the dim lights, like it was waiting for me, and it was opened to the patient information page. My breath hitched. A fresh wave of icy dread washed over me, colder than anything I'd experienced so far. There, scrawled in an elegant, almost calligraphic script, was rule number 6. If a chart has your birth date, leave the hospital. Don't look back. And directly beneath that handwritten warning, on the chart itself, were the patient details, patient name, a blank, ominous question mark. But the next line, birth date. And there it was, not a random date, not a mistake. It was my birth date, day, month, and year. Every digit matched. My own birth date, on a patient chart, on the quiet floor, under patient X, the diagnosis section, typically filled with complex medical jargon, held only 2 words, 2 words that felt like a death sentence, written just for me. Soul degradation, stage 4. Soul degradation, stage 4. What did that even mean? Was this what happened to Maria? Was this what happened to the silent, smiling patients in their beds, their skin peeling like wallpaper? Was this my fate? The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a job anymore. This wasn't about surviving a scary shift. This was about me. I was becoming a patient. I was becoming one of them. I didn't sign out. I didn't grab my bag. I didn't even remember to put my badge away. All I knew was rule number 6. Leave the hospital. Don't look back. My feet moved on their own, a primal flight response kicking in. I ran, down the deserted corridors, the silence now a buzzing in my ears. The familiar hum of the building seemed to warp, to distort into a low, guttural growl. I punched the elevator button frantically, but it glowed red, stubbornly refusing to move. The stairs. I slammed through the stairwell door, taking the steps 2 at a time, the concrete reverberating with the panicked thud of my boots. I didn't care who heard me. I just had to get out. I burst through the main lobby doors, past the empty reception desk, and out into the cool, damp night air of the parking lot. The relief, for a fleeting second, was overwhelming. A gasp of fresh air. Freedom. My car was there. Thank God. My beat-up sedan, a familiar beacon of escape. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. And then I saw it. The license plate. My car. But the tag number. It wasn't mine. It was patient 7's tag number, the one that was supposed to be on the gurney he arrived on, but somehow had never been there. And in the driver's seat, hunched over the steering wheel, waiting for me, the shadow, the same impossibly deep, stretching shadow from room 7. It was still there, still waiting, and in its elongated, shadowy hand, it held something small, pale, and unmistakably human. It was Mariah's severed hand. Her engagement ring glinted dully in the weak parking lot light, a macabre trophy. It wasn't just following me, it was waiting for me. It knew I would run, it knew where I was going. And now, it was in my car, my supposed escape. It was just another trap. Maria's severed hand clutched in that impossible shadow, a twisted wave of welcome. The breath caught in my throat, a scream that withered before it could escape. There was no escape. Not here. Not from it. The shadow in my driver's seat seemed to grow, to fill the confines of my small car, beckoning me into its suffocating embrace. I took a stumbling step back, then another, the metallic tang of fear thick on my tongue. My eyes darted wildly, desperately, searching for anything else, any other way out, and then, through the desperate haze of my panic, I saw it, on the ambulance bay wall, scrawled hastily in what looked like dried blood, or perhaps just very old, faded red paint, was the final, desperate message. Rule number 7. If it follows, enter the ambulance. The siren saves you. It was insane. More insane than any rule before it. An ambulance. A siren. How could that possibly save me from a shadow that could distort reality and wear Maria's face? But there was no other choice. Nowhere else to run, and I could hear them now. Wet footsteps, dragging, squelching on the asphalt behind me. The shadow was out of my car. It was coming. It was closing in. I didn't think. I just moved. A desperate, primal surge towards that waiting, dark maw of the ambulance. The back doors were slightly ajar, a sliver of inky blackness promising either salvation or a deeper hell. The dragging footsteps were closer, a terrifying counterpoint to the frantic pounding of my heart. I lunged, throwing myself inside, the stale air thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else, something cold and metallic. I slammed the heavy back doors shut with a desperate, echoing clang, and then silence. A kind of silence that existed only on the quiet floor, But now it was here, within the confines of this metal box. No sirens, no movement, just the terrifying quiet. I braced myself, my eyes wide, staring into the oppressive blackness of the interior. Was this it? Was this where it took me? Then, a voice. Not from inside the ambulance, but from a crackle over a distant, tinny radio. It was Ms. Albright's voice, calm, clinical, detached, code black. Patient secured. Patient secured. I was the patient. The ambulance shuddered and started moving. There was no driver, no one in the front seat. The engine hummed to life with a low, guttural growl, and the vehicle began to roll slowly, steadily, out of the parking lot. The red emergency lights on the dash flashed, casting a lurid glow on the empty seat beside me. My breath hitched, tears blurring my vision. It hadn't saved me. The siren hadn't saved me. It was a lie. Just another rule to lead me into its waiting jaws. I scrambled, my body screaming with exhaustion and terror, to the rear window, desperate for one last glimpse of the outside world, of the hospital that had been my prison, and now my tomb. And in the rear-view mirror, as the ambulance pulled out onto the main road, I saw him, patient 7. He was in the back seat, directly behind me, his form impossibly contorted to fit the space, yet his eyes were open, fixed on my reflection. He was smiling, a wide, shark-like grin that stretched too far, revealing too many teeth. His shadow, the one that had followed me, that had been in my car, that had Maria's face. It was gone. Not gone from the ambulance, gone from him, because now, it's inside me. I can feel it. A cold, expanding emptiness behind my ribs, a growing hunger that isn't my own. It's feeding on my fear, my desperation, and soon, it will be strong enough to leave, strong enough to hunt. So, if you hear sirens tonight, not the distant wail of a passing emergency, but a siren that seems to call to you, closer, louder, more insistent than it should be, don't look out your window, don't answer the door, hide, and pray it passes you by, because it's not an ambulance coming for help. It's hunting new nurses, and it knows your address now, and it's always looking for a quiet floor.